Okay, right here. Hi, guys, and welcome to the That's Where I'm At podcast. I'm Laura, and today I have Kelsey. Kelsey is a first-generation college graduate, certified mental health professional, published author, advocate, community activist, ordained chaplain, and four-time pageant title holder across Connecticut and Nevada. Kelsey has survived and is now overcoming abuse in many forms, most significantly institutionalized abuse. Being the child of an addicted parent, Kelsey was raised in an abusive, dysfunctional environment. This resulted in the development of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and made her especially susceptible, that's hard to say, to re-victimization in her adulthood. I was a speech therapist too. She she is described as a tenacious advocate and passionate leader who serves her community with boldness, assertiveness, and eagerness to create change. Her story is one of courage, resilience, and faith, defying all odds and overcoming every obstacle that has come her way with grace and unrelenting grit. Welcome, Kelsey.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad for you to share your story. When you and I talked before, I was like, girl, geez, it's a lot, but I love to see where you are now, because knowing where you are now, just, being, kind of Facebook friends and all that kind of stuff, it's like, it's been amazing to know like where you came from. So I'd love for you to share with the audience, like really what got you to this place. Tell us a little bit about these challenges you overcame.
Absolutely. So I look back on my life and I realize like it was right from the get-go. I really didn't have a shot at much. I shouldn't have anyway, right? And God's been
Right,
really good to me and his
right.
grace has been over my life, but I was actually born addicted to drugs. My mother used cocaine when she was
Okay.
pregnant. She used marijuana and alcohol. So right there from the beginning, right? Not the best way
Right,
to start out. And so
right.
I realized, looking back, I was born into a mess, right? My mom, obviously, she had a drug problem, and my father was abusive to her, and she was a mess, and he was a mess. And I kind of look at it now and I'm like, wow, look at what I was up against. And so I've heard stories
Right.
about my mom, snorting cocaine when she was pregnant with me, and my father
Wow.
getting mad at her and throwing her into a wall, right?
Wow.
Like, gee, and I'm just here like, hey,
Right.
fetus.
Right.
And so that
You're
that's
like,
where my
I
story
didn't do
begins. Like,
anything.
right, like don't hurt me, you guys, So
Right.
that's where my story begins. And so, I like to think like humble beginnings, right? It's
Right.
it's more like dreadful beginnings, but
Yeah.
I'm here today and I'm excited to be able to tell the story. And so I was born 3 pounds. I was only a month early, so somewhere along the way I just wasn't growing, right?
Right.
Something just stopped somewhere along the way.
Right.
And obviously I wasn't there. And I actually didn't know that I was born addicted to drugs until I was 18. And
Mm,
I knew that something had gone wrong, but I couldn't get anybody to tell me. So when I turned 18, I requested my birth records because I really
okay.
wanted to know.
So you
And
had
so
family around you that knew the story but wasn't telling.
I guess honestly, I can't even tell you what they knew or didn't know, right?
Right.
Because I
Yeah.
can't really get a straight answer
Right.
out of anybody.
That sounds about
But
right.
I just knew something was wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, I've had a lot of health issues and heart problems, and I'll talk about
Okay.
that, but I knew that something must have gone wrong.
Hmm.
And so I don't know where the disconnect was, but for whatever reason, they sent me home with my mom.
Oh,
Right? I don't
wow.
know if Child Protective Services was called. I don't have any idea.
Right. And
So
then, so then you requested your records, and
I
did you
did.
find anything else out from there?
Yeah. So honestly, I don't remember exactly what it said, but it
Right.
basically was saying that I was affected by my
Okay.
mother's drug use. And
Okay.
I did find out later from some family members that she did use cocaine,
Hmm.
right? So I kind of just ended up putting two and two together. But given that I was 3 pounds, right, and it
Right.
did say in there was very much affected um, and addicted to those drugs. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then I went home with them and I got, brought home into a very fun, colorful environment, if you will.
Right, exactly. So tell us about that. And frankly, I'm really surprised they sent you home, especially to put in your records that they knew your mom affected you. You know what I mean? So I'm surprised, but I don't know
Yeah.
the laws, of course we don't know the laws, and at least, for whatever state you were born in and stuff. So then, tell me about, kind of your childhood and really what the family dynamic was like.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a good example of one of those kids that falls through the cracks, right? Because I
Okay.
look back and I'm like, where were the adults, right?
Oh,
Where was the
yes.
help? And
Yes.
so my father, looking back, I realized was abusive to my mother.
Mm,
And so my mom left him.
okay.
I think it was that day when he threw her into that wall,
Yeah.
and she called for help, and somebody in my family went and helped her move out. So she lived with someone else for a little while with me, and then ultimately ended up going home to her parents' house, my maternal grandparents, so her parents. And it wasn't the worst situation in the world, but it definitely wasn't the best.
Okay.
And it was not an environment that a child should live in, right?
Okay.
So materialistically, I had everything that I ever could have wanted,
Mm-hmm.
but it was like a war zone in there. And the dynamic was not good. There was a lot of domestic violence, there was a lot of fighting. My mom was using drugs all the time. Everybody was just yelling all the time. There was
Yeah.
always a crisis situation. And
Yeah.
so I grew up as one of my mother's primary caretakers.
Oh my
When you
goodness.
have somebody, right, that has a drug problem, everybody kind of
Yes.
caters to that person, and hence codependency is born, right? And
Right.
that's the start of that
Right.
that behavior. And so everybody kind of catered to my mother a whole lot,
Mm-hmm.
or my uncles, or whoever it was that was kind of coming in and causing this dysfunction. And my mom had it really rough, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look back now, my uncle used to beat the hell out of my mother.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
I watched it, right? I watched
Right.
these things.
Right.
Sometimes it was verbal, but sometimes it was physical. And my mom just had a really tough hand
Yeah.
dealt to her. I look at, I don't know a whole lot of what she went through with my father, but I know enough to know
Right.
this, like this poor lady just had
Well,
the crap kicked out of her. And
especially looking back, right, as an adult, and you start maybe to remember things or whatever, you can, I just think back to, like, my parents are immigrants, and I'm like, how did they do that? Like, how
right.
did they,
And
there's certain that my mom was
absolutely.
pregnant and she had two toddlers. How'd she get
Right.
on an airplane and drive and fly across the world? Like, I don't,
Right.
like those kinds of things. But as an adult, you look back and you go, wow. you know,
Hindsight's 2020, right? I'm just now coming to a place at 25 years old where I can look back
yeah,
and really have a lot more empathy and compassion and understand the dynamic. But as a child,
of
right, when I was
course.
taking care of my mother, I
Right.
lived every single day afraid that my mom was going to die.
Right.
And the reality was is that I knew that my mom was going to die. I
Right.
just didn't know when. So it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And if my mom was breathing in the morning, it was a good day.
Okay.
And
And no
she,
child should have to ever do
no,
that. No.
no, and especially it was just too much weight on me. It was too much responsibility.
Right.
In a lot of ways, I was doing the job of my grandparents.
Okay.
My grandmother, I look back now and realize, was very, very codependent,
Hmm.
very codependent. My grandfather was not the nicest man either. So I'm
Hmm.
making all of these connections. And
Right.
then we had my uncles coming in, and they had issues, and everybody just had issues.
Yeah.
And sometimes my mother would overdose 3 times a week,
Oh my
and then I'd
gosh.
find her on the floor or whatever, and I'd have to call 911. She used to take me with her into downtown New Haven, Connecticut to buy her drugs,
Oh my
and
gosh.
she would have me like lay down in the back seat because she didn't want the drug dealers to see me, and that was her way, right? In her mind, I want to keep my daughter safe, so I'm going to have her hide. Well, maybe just don't take your daughter with you when you go to your meet your
Right.
drug dealers, right? But in
Right.
my mother's state of mind,
Yes.
she wasn't thinking that, right?
Right. Hmm.
Could have just left me with somebody else. It doesn't make sense. You can't make sense of disorder.
No.
You can't make sense of chaos. And so when I was 7 years old, I shared a room with her, which was again not ideal, not an ideal situation.
Mm.
And it was Halloween, and I was 7 years old. I believe it was 2005. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and she wasn't there. And I went to get up, and she was on the floor.
Oh,
And prior to that, I had watched her take a bunch of medication. So she tried to kill herself. And so I woke up and I found her. And that is when the first time I remember Child Protective Services being involved. And
Wow.
I remember them asking me, do you know what happened to your mom? And I
Mhm.
kept lying and telling them no. And I guess I was a bad liar, even at
Okay.
7,
Right.
because they could tell that I knew.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, she took a bunch of pills, but my mom always took a bunch of pills, right? So I
Right.
didn't know.
Right.
I just knew that, she was dying and I found her. And that was the first time I remember, I think, intervening for her.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it didn't end. It just didn't end.
Mhm.
Um, I remember moments where I would like hide in closets and different things because everybody was fighting. I mean, I lived in fight or flight mode
Right.
for 18 years, just one crisis after another, trying to do right by her, trying to
Right.
keep her alive. I remember one instance, I got up in the middle of the night and I went out to the kitchen, and it must have been oxys. You know how opiates are a downer, right? So people nod
Okay.
off. She
Oh,
was
okay.
nodding off at the kitchen table, and she had a lit cigarette in her hand and she was burning her hair with it.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember like saying to her, "Mommy, like I thought you weren't going to do this anymore." And she cried and she said, I'm sorry,
And how
right? And
old were you at that time?
I have a lot of gaps. I
Yeah,
have a
of
hard
course.
time
Right.
putting years and ages to things. I don't remember, but I was young.
Right.
And I put
Exactly.
her to bed and I was like, "You promised you weren't gonna do this anymore." And she's like, "I'm sorry, I know, like I'm sorry." I mean, she used to burn holes in the tablecloth with the
Right.
lit cigarette, like, and I would put her to bed.
Yeah.
There were times when I would like clean up her vomit.
Yeah.
She used to lock me in the bathroom with her when she would smoke her crack. So she at some point she switched from cocaine to crack, right?
Okay.
Because it was cheaper. It
Okay.
became the cheaper option. Um, and so she would lock me in there with her.
Mm.
And I think I was 5 years old. I told my cousin, "You can't tell anyone this, but my mommy smokes out of a pipe, but please don't tell."
Okay. You just knew that that just wasn't right or whatever.
Obviously, I knew that it was wrong.
Right.
And I have a feeling she must have been telling me, "Don't tell anybody.
Right. And
Don't tell
that's what I was
anybody."
going to ask you was, did you have anybody like even at school, like did the teachers know, or did you have a counselor talk to you? Did you ever say anything? Did anyone suspect? Did you get to school?
School was interesting. What's bothersome to me in my adulthood is how many people knew.
Oh, okay.
And I think that there were people that tried to intervene,
Yeah.
right? But then where was the help?
Right.
And I think it's hard for some children because if you're not being beaten,
Right.
you fall kind of low on the severity scale. But I
Right.
think that we underestimate the impact of complex ongoing trauma and what
Right.
that does to a person.
Right.
Um, I remember going to school. So this was after my mother attempted suicide. I went to school and I cried. And I told the teacher that my mom was in the hospital and I wasn't allowed to see her. I think that that tipped them off
Okay.
because she was in a psych ward and I was under 18.
Okay.
But I look back and I know the neighbors knew,
Yeah.
right? People knew what was happening to me. And I
Right.
think some people tried to intervene, but at the same time, the bystander effect is real. And it's like
Right.
people think, well, I'm not going to say anything because somebody else will say something. Somebody else will help her.
Yeah.
Somebody else will step in, and then nobody does, right? And so I just suffered for a
Right.
really long time. And I was constantly trying to help my mother, trying to save my mother. It was my job
Right.
to make sure that she was okay, right? And I was always afraid it was going to fall on me. I
Right.
remember being a little girl and she would go out and she would always say, "I'm going out." And I would be like, "Oh no, mommy's going out,"
Right.
right? And she wouldn't come home. And I
Oh gosh.
remember pulling out the phone book as a little kid and I knew what bars she went to, so I knew which
Oh my
numbers to
gosh.
look up. I don't even mean to like it's not funny, right? But at this
Well,
point in my life, it's
I
like
mean, it is in a way.
it's
I mean,
it's
like
it's
it's
it's it's horrifying, right? But
right.
I knew what bars to call, and I would call and I would say, "Is my mom there? Like,
Yeah.
is Tracy Matthews there?" And
Yeah.
they'd be
Like
like,
nobody should have to really, no kid should ever have to
"Right,
do that.
my grandparents are asleep on the couch."
Right. And why are you doing that? Right.
And I'm looking for my mother. Like every time the phone rang when I was a kid and my mom was out, I was terrified because I
Yeah.
was like, is this the phone call?
Right.
Um, I would walk in the room and she would be like on the floor. I'm like, oh, geez, seriously. Like, and eventually it just got old and I got
Right.
older and
Right.
it kept getting worse. And I'm like, seriously, like, this is ridiculous.
Right.
And this to me was normal.
Yeah.
It was just normal. I wasn't allowed to really have friends over because nobody wanted, who wanted their kid at my house?
Well, who
I
would
had a
want to really,
Right. I had like a select few friends that were allowed to come over, but
Okay.
nobody wanted their child at my house. Like I was ostracized. The other kids made fun of me. They
Yeah.
made fun of me
Yeah.
because I always smelled like smoke because they smoked in the house. They
Okay.
made fun of me
Yeah.
because of the way my mom was. Like I was bullied. I never fit in.
Yeah.
Um, it just was a nightmare. And I lived this nightmare every single day. And I think when I was around, I think it was sixth grade, I started having flashbacks and PTSD symptoms, and I didn't know what that was. And I
Okay.
didn't know whose memories they were.
Okay.
Like I would remember things, but it would be fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, is this even mine? Like, what is this?
Right.
And now I don't really remember a whole lot, which is great, right? Like there's things that I remember, but I'm
Yeah.
glad I don't remember a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I started having PTSD symptoms and I started cutting myself. And I don't even know where I came up with that. I don't know where I heard of
Oh,
that.
okay.
I just knew I was in pain. I was in a lot of pain.
Mhm.
And that's something that I started to do.
Right.
And it was difficult because from the outside looking in, I had it all. I
Mhm.
danced for 13 years. I rode horses. I did pageants. I played
Okay.
guitar, right? So my grandparents tried really, really hard. They
Right.
were trying to, especially my grandmother. My grandmother basically raised me, and she tried really, really hard to make up for what I was lacking.
Right.
And she thought that, those were the right things. And unfortunately, the state had told them when my mom tried to kill herself, you can take custody of Kelsey, but Tracy can't live here. You can't have both. So
Wow.
either Kelsey goes into foster care or Tracy leaves. And then my grandparents lied to the state.
Oh, okay. And said
So
that she
they,
wasn't going to live there?
and
Okay.
then my mom just kept living there. So even when they had custody of me and I should have been the priority, I really wasn't the priority.
Right.
So then that kind of goes back into what I was saying. I had everything I ever wanted, but I didn't really have what I needed because I wasn't safe. Like, yes, I had a roof over my head,
Right.
I had clothes, right? I was fed. They
Yes.
weren't beating me. Well, sometimes my mother hit me, right, when
Right.
she would have an episode.
Right.
But I was terrified. They terrorized me. And I realize now looking back that I was raised in abuse. I was raised in a
Right.
cycle of abuse.
Right.
And so I had it all from the outside looking in. And so
Mm-hmm.
because of that, people said I was spoiled. Kelsey's a brat.
Oh
Kelsey's
my.
ungrateful. And they're not seeing the reality and the totality of what it is that I was living in every single day of my life. And so they really tried, but the only thing they really knew how to do was open their wallet. And I appreciate that. I mean, I have had opportunities in my life
Right.
that most people never have because my grandparents put out so much money to do the best that they could, right? To
Right.
try to give me a good life. And we went on vacations, right? Like it wasn't all bad. And
Right.
I think that that's what made it confusing because
Oh,
when you think
yes.
about it, that's intermittent reinforcement.
Right.
It's
Exactly.
good and then it's bad and then it's good and then it's bad, right? And that is what creates the trauma bond. And so my entire
Yes.
childhood was really a trauma bond because we would have really good moments and then we would have really bad, explosive, volatile moments,
Mhm.
right? Or it would be my mom would be okay one minute and then the next minute there would be a crisis.
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of back and forth. And I never knew what I was waking up to. I never knew what I was coming home to. And of course, everything was my fault.
Yeah.
I remember my mom, I had to call 911 for her, and they took her out. And I heard my grandmother on the phone telling somebody, oh, yeah, Tracy's in the hospital because Kelsey put her there.
Why?
Awesome.
What was her reason
Awesome.
for saying that?
I don't know, but it was my fault. See, so I was
Yeah.
raised where things ended up my fault. Um, they knew what buttons to push, so they would push my buttons,
Right.
reactive abuse, right? So they would push my
Yes.
buttons and then
Exactly.
I would explode and they would do it in front of people and then they would say, "Look, she's a brat." And look,
Yes.
she's crazy and all this stuff. So
So let's talk a little bit about, that reactive. Well, we don't have to talk all about the reactive abuse and all those things, but, with your grandmother being codependent, right? I know that they're trying to make up for the way your mom is, right? With all the things that they gave you, the vacations and everything, opening their wallet. Um, and they probably didn't know what to do. And
They
then
didn't.
they probably didn't have the emotional capacity to even
Mm-mm.
love you either, because who knows their background, right? What
Right.
they grew up in. And so, and I just, that breaks my heart. But let's keep going. Yeah, reactive abuse is when, yeah, when you react to the abuse that you're getting.
Right. And
Yeah,
emotionally, it just wasn't there. Like my emotional needs weren't met. And I
right,
remember, stories of like, we read to you and we loved you and we sang to you. And I know they did.
right.
Right. And there was a time where I was attached to them. But I think at some point I went through so much pain
Yes,
and they became so unsafe that I think I just detached. I think I started
right,
just dissociating and detaching. And then it became a point I couldn't be emotionally vulnerable with them, A, because it was used against me, and
right.
B, because I had to be strong, right? I had to be there to make sure
Yeah,
things were okay. So eventually I stopped being emotionally vulnerable. I remember when I was cutting myself, right? Like obviously I'm in pain and
right,
somebody in my house told me like that's stupid, you're stupid for doing that. Like that was the response that I was getting.
right.
And so I was humiliated. There was a lot of shame.
Yes.
Meanwhile, I'm chronically ill. I've had 3 heart surgeries in my life.
Okay.
I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia when I was in high school. I had sinus surgery when I was in high school,
Yeah,
right? So just what do we expect, right? Like
right.
addicted to drugs, living in constant crisis, fight or flight,
Yes.
and that just takes its toll. And so I have all of this stuff. And
Mhm.
by the time I got to high school, I was a wreck. I was a wreck. I was in an intensive outpatient program. I was going to therapy every day, like having to leave school early, and then the heart surgery, and then the sinus surgery. And all of this is all going on while my mother is still in crisis all the time. Right. And so everything ended up coming to a head when I was 17.
Okay.
It was my grandfather's birthday and I was at work. I worked when I was in high school, and my mom came to get me, brought me home, and I hadn't been to school in like 2 weeks. I was sick. I didn't feel good. And I got to spend that 2 weeks with my mom, and it was actually great. We watched movies and we hung out. And finally, she came in my room that night and she said, "You have to go to school." She's like, "You are a senior. You're
Right.
going to hate yourself if you don't graduate and you have to repeat senior year." And she sat with me and she's like, "What can I do to help you?" And we talked about it. We had this great plan. She was awesome. And I didn't even know that she was using again,
Okay.
right? I just had no idea. When I was a kid, I was around it. But when I got older, I wasn't home as much.
Hmm.
So I didn't see what I saw when I
Okay.
was a kid. And it was all great. Everything was fine. And we came up with a plan. And she's like, okay, we're going to do this in the morning. I love you. And then she died.
Oh my gosh.
That she just died. So
Ugh.
I went to bed that night. Everything was great. My mom and I were great. And then I woke up the next morning and I realized nobody got me up.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, wait a minute. There's something going on.
Right.
So I heard my grandmother on the phone with the paramedics, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And the thing with drug overdoses is that if you have somebody in the home, especially,
Hmm.
overdosing earlier in the evening is better
Oh.
because there's somebody there to find them.
Oh. Right.
But if it's later and everybody goes to sleep, you never want somebody that's overdosing to sleep because they don't wake
Right.
up.
Right.
And my grandmother always told me, have her sleep it off. I'm like, no, that's not what you do.
Oh my
No, no, no.
gosh.
Like they just didn't know what to
They
do,
didn't
right?
know what to do. Yeah.
So there were some mornings, very few and far between, where I would wake up with her like that, and I always knew that that was bad
Yeah.
because you don't want them to sleep. So I got up and I said, what the hell is going on? Right? Like it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Like,
Right.
seriously, you guys. So
Right.
I went in and I grabbed the phone from her and I just heard her telling the paramedic she's blue. And I'm like, okay, this is not good. This is bad. She was face down,
Hmm.
and I'm like, took the phone and I'm like, you guys need to hurry up. Like, please hurry up. This is really bad. They were not hurrying up.
Yeah.
There was no there was no need for them to hurry. They knew that.
Oh.
The
Okay.
dispatch knew that,
Oh.
right? Like there really wasn't. she's blue, right?
Oh my
She
gosh.
was cold. Like it just kind of was what it was, right? So they didn't really, they kind of took their time a little bit because they already knew. And they came and they already knew where the room was, right? Because they're there all the time.
Okay.
We had a relationship with them. My grandfather was a
Jeez.
volunteer firefighter. So they
Okay.
come in, they go back to her room, and my cat was under her. And I'll never forget having to have them lift her
Oh,
so we could pull the cat out from under her. And the
that's,
cat was terrified, right? Like it was awful.
oh my
So they made
gosh.
everybody leave, and I'm sitting in the kitchen and the paramedics came out and they were like, "So, your mom's been down a long time."
Okay.
And I looked at them and I was like, "What are you doing for, excuse my French, but what the fuck are you doing?" Right? You
Right.
go back in there and you
Right.
help her.
Right.
You go in there and you help her. Like, what are you talking to me for? Go help her.
Right.
And they just looked at me. They just
Yeah.
looked at me with this pitiful kind of look on their face.
Yeah.
And I just kept yelling at them. I just kept yelling at them. And finally they were like, "Kelsey, your mother has died. Like she's dead. She's not coming back." And I don't know who screamed. I don't remember if it was me. I don't remember if it was I don't remember, but I just
Right.
remember getting up and like running outside and just feeling like, "Oh my God, my mom's dead." Like her body's in there. Like I saw it.
Right.
It was just awful.
So
And then
from there, how, oh my gosh. So I know
welcome to
it's
my life, friends.
right. No, and you know what? This is why I want to tell these stories because I like to, where you are now. That's why I want people to know, that there's hope and it's not an easy road, but there's hope.
Hmm.
And I know even you are surprised. Sometimes you're like, is this really my life? The way you're
Yeah.
living your life with certain things. I'm so proud of you with different things. So,
Thank you.
okay, so talk to me about, there might be more to that story in there, but talk to me
There's
about,
always more.
there's always more, but it's not that
You
long
know
of a
what's
show.
funny? If I could just do a ha-ha
Yeah.
for a minute, I'm
Okay.
almost wondering, like, did I say enough?
Oh, did you say it?
Did
You
I
said
say,
you
see,
you
because for
said lots,
me,
girl.
because
I
for
know there's
me,
I
it's
know.
like I just tell it because I've told the story so many times now in my
Yes.
advocacy work. For me, it's like, oh, that doesn't seem that bad. Like, did I leave something out? But to other people that are watching, they're like, what? But for
Right.
me, it's like, oh yeah, no, this happened to me, and I'm like,
Yes.
did
And
I
I
did
know
I did I
okay,
give
and I
enough
know what you're
horrible
saying.
detail, right? But everybody else is like, please don't say anymore. We don't want
Well,
to know.
okay, so yes, we'll insert other horrible details here. No, I mean you and I talked when we talked for hours because there
It goes on forever.
guys, there's lots of other horrible details, but you don't need to hear every
My
last one
reality.
of them,
Anyway,
right? Because I want to get into like
right.
when we have a look, we all have a reason that we became the person we became. Okay, so no matter what age or whatever. So let's just skip ahead a little bit to moving to Las Vegas and then kind of how that when you were getting into relationships, and I don't know if it was romantic or just like work relationships or anything like that, you know what that looked like, because when we have a childhood that's the thing. Everybody thinks like, I don't need to work on anything. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
right.
we all
It
we
follows you.
it follows you. Look, you can't leave it. You went from Connecticut to Las Vegas
It
and it's
followed
like
me.
it followed you. Like you brought it with you. It was a backpack.
It followed me.
Right. So let's talk about what that started to look like for you as you started to go to college and get into some employment and things like that with other people.
Yeah, so when my mom finally died, I hate to say it like that because that's so abrasive, but it was shocking but not surprising. And I
Right.
felt this, there was so much grief, but there was also this relief, right? Because I knew that it
Yeah.
was over and
Right.
that she wasn't suffering anymore and that I didn't have to carry this and I could finally live my life. And my mom wanted me to live my life. She didn't want
Gosh.
me to get stuck there and end up like her.
Yes. And you
And
could have. That
so
was a
I
choice you
could
had.
have,
You could have. That was a choice you had. You could have,
absolutely.
and no one would have blamed you that you would have curled up and, almost died along with her, right? But I'm glad you didn't.
Thank
Glad you
you. And I
decided.
mean,
Yeah.
I could have ended up on drugs. I could have ended up on the
Yes.
street. I could have ended up in an institution, right? Like there's so many places I could have ended up. And,
Right.
sitting here in this office at work, like, is not the place that I ever anticipated that I would end up. But my dream school was the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Even when I was in high school, I had friends here. I came to visit here and I toured the campus and I fell in love with it. And I remember telling my mom that this is where I wanted to be. And she looked at me and she said, I want you to do it. She said, I want you to get out of here and run as far away as you can and don't look back.
Yeah.
And so I applied to UNLV right before she died and they denied me. Why? Because I was a mess, right? Like, I was a total mess. I didn't have the test scores. I barely went to school. My GPA was awful, right? Like, it's lucky that I even graduated. I just barely graduated. And so I appealed and I did what I do best. I wrote a letter. And I, told them, I said, I know I don't look like much on paper, but I swear if you give me an opportunity, I will prove myself. And I told my story. And in the midst of that appeal process, she died. And I had to call admissions and say, hi, remember the letter that I wrote? Well, my mom died. And I'll never forget the admissions counselor who literally said to me on the phone, oh my God, how much can one kid take? I was a kid. I was 18 years old.
Of course.
So anyway, they kind of pity voted me in. I really didn't earn my way into UNLV at that time.
Listen, what a blessing in disguise. I mean, who cares?
It was.
Who cares how you got here?
I was on academic probation, right? That's how I started. And I applied for financial aid. Everything was great. And then about 2 weeks before I was scheduled to move into my dorm, they called and they said, so after your financial aid, you owe us $18,000 a year. And I was like, okay, all right, that's fine. That's okay. Everything's fine, right? Like, I'll just get a loan.
Sure.
$18,000. So I start calling banks. I'm 18 years old. I have no credit, no cosigner because I have no legal parents. Guardianship is null and void.
Right.
I have no income.
You have nothing.
And the banks are like, yeah, click. Like, good luck with that. Nobody's going to give me any money. I had about $13,000 that we raised after my mom died. They did a little fundraiser for me, right? And I hit a wall and I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to UNLV. And I was so devastated and I was so sick and tired of life beating me upside the head because that was the one thing that I wanted more than anything. And I knew that I was meant to be there.
Yeah.
And so I withdrew from UNLV and I decided with the help of some sweet ladies at the cat shelter that I volunteered at that I was going to move to Vegas anyway. They were like, why not just move there permanently, get residency, you call the electric company, you have the lights turned on, you find a job, right? I was like, I can't do that. And they said, why?
Right.
And I said, I don't know. So I went home that day and I said to my grandparents, I'm moving to Vegas. I'm going to Vegas anyway. And they looked at me and they're like, oh God, Tracy's dead and Kelsey's lost her mind, right? Like, Kelsey's gone off the deep end. Right. And I remember that one of my grandparents' friends was sitting at the table and they were like, you're never going to be able to do it. Like, you're not going to be able to afford it. You're not going to be able to do it. And I'm like, don't ever tell Kelsey that she can't do something because then she's going to do it twice and take pictures. Okay. Because that's how I am.
Right.
So I got on my one-way flight. I moved out here. I stayed with my friends for 3 weeks. I found 2 jobs in an apartment. I moved in. And then I flew back to Connecticut to get my cat Cinder, and I moved to Las Vegas by myself at 18 years old.
That's so awesome.
And it was the greatest thing that I've ever done. I had no fear. It was crazy. It was certifiable. I had no plan. Like, certifiably insane. Right. I just came out here, but I knew, well, I guess I could go home. Right. But I knew I only had that money while I had that money, and that was my one shot. That was like my one ticket out of there.
Right.
So I worked for Pier 1, and I worked for the Melting Pot. And I paid my bills and I did my thing and I had some other jobs that I hated. And finally I decided I'm going to go back to school. It's time. I don't want to do a dead end job for the rest of my life. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I was working retail. I'm very passion driven. So if I'm not passionate about it, I will hate it and I will quit.
Right.
And so I got residency, like I said I was going to, and then I applied to the College of Southern Nevada. And I remember being terrified when I started college, because I didn't know that I was going to be able to do it. Like, when I was growing up, I was under the impression that I was street smart, but not book smart because I didn't do well in school. So I just thought, like, I'm stupid, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to succeed at college. And I ended up graduating from CSN with a 3.5 GPA. and honors. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. But of course, that wasn't without some type of huge fiasco, right?
Mhm.
Because nothing can just ever be easy. And so after I moved to Vegas, I realized I need therapy, don't I? Like, I found my mom dead and I lived all this stuff and I have PTSD, so I need therapy. So I went and I found a therapist
Okay.
thinking that that was going to be good. No, not good, bad.
Okay, well, not all therapy is bad, but I know your story
No, my
is a
situation,
story of warning.
insanity, because of course it happened to me. When I tell the story, people don't believe me. When do we make a Lifetime movie? When do I get signed for my
Right.
Lifetime movie, right? I'll
Well,
write the
and this
book.
is the thing is that, we've talked about your background and stuff, right? And
Hmm.
so this is where, even in a safe place, where people can take advantage of you, right?
Yes, I was very susceptible. I didn't know that then,
Right.
but I was very vulnerable and susceptible to abusive situations where people would either take advantage of me or exploit me. And the one thing that I will say that I had going for me is that I had a mommy wound
Okay.
instead of a daddy wound,
Okay.
right? To some extent, for like a lack of better term. So I wasn't looking for love from a man. I was
Okay.
looking for love from a mother. I wanted a mother.
Right.
And I started working with this therapist, and it's interesting because I actually picked this lady. I didn't know what I was signing up for, but
Okay.
I was sitting in the counseling center and she was sitting on the floor with this little boy, and I was drawn to her. And she went into her office, and I went up to the desk and I said, "Hey, who's that in there?" And they told me, and I said, "Well, I want her."
Yeah.
Well, gee, I had no idea what I had just
Your
done.
picker was broken.
It was broken, but it was right on point. And
Right.
I'll get to that. But
Right.
I started working with her and she was very loving and very maternal, and that scared me because I knew with somewhere within myself I knew that it was not, I couldn't get close to her in that way.
Okay.
So I kept her at arm's length and I didn't trust her. And honestly, this lady had to work really hard, right? Because I was a pain in the rear end.
Mm-hmm.
I spent most of my life being a pain in the rear end. There's a lot of people that will attest to that.
Okay.
I always meant well, but I was going through a lot,
Right.
right? And she just finally like had it. She was an intern and she was like, "What do you want? Like, I don't know what to do for you." Like, and I said, "Can I have a hug?"
Oh, okay.
And she's like, "Really? Like, that's all you want?" And
Mm-hmm.
she held me
Yeah.
and I got attached to her. And so finally I started to work with her. And one thing led to another and we became very, very bonded, but it got off course very, very, very quickly.
Okay. When you say off
And
course, like you were friendly outside of the office, or
boundaries were being crossed, and so
okay.
it was never sexual, right? It never
Right.
went that direction, but
Right.
there was some serious boundary violations that ended up occurring. And so she had given me her personal phone number.
And that, just so everyone knows, is not allowed.
I mean, in some instances, just depending on the person, but
Okay.
it got to the point where she was texting me late at night
Oh,
and
goodness.
we were chit chatting and joking around, and
Yes.
she started telling me about her life. And of course, I'm a very
Okay.
loving person, so I just love to love people.
Right.
And ultimately, I think what ended up happening is I was feeling a need.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a degree in social work, and they teach you when your client starts to fulfill a need
Yes.
that people in your life should be filling, you have a problem
Okay.
because that should never happen, right? And so she started telling me about, my daughters don't talk to me and my husband this and my brother that, and I'm in therapy with this
Oh
person.
my
And she started telling me all this
gosh.
stuff about her. So
Yeah.
of course, what am I doing? I'm nurturing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm loving, and it just got really, really disheveled. And we kept getting closer and closer and closer,
Mm.
but that's where the trauma bonding was happening
Right.
because that intermittent reinforcement started. And I remember saying to her one time, I don't know about this. Are we able to do this? Like,
Yeah.
are we able to, are you going to be able to help me in therapy if we're friendly, right? If we're friends, right? Because that's what she told me. Like, we were friends, but she was also my therapist. And she also told me that she sees me like a daughter. So now Kelsey's confused.
Oh
And I
yeah.
said to her, "Are we going to be able to do this even
Right.
at 18, right? Are we going to be able to can you be effective like this, right?
Right.
And she said to me, I can do it. The question is, can you do it?
There's, uh,
Gaslighting. That
I
was the
was,
first.
well, but not only that, God, just as the manipulation, that's what I'm hearing. Gosh, I mean, the grooming, the manipulation that you were it's really manipulation, right? That you were,
Right.
can you do it? Like, what do
I
you,
can do it. I can keep the boundaries. The question is, can you do it? Well, and I
right,
was so vulnerable and I was raised in everything was my fault, right? So
right.
I apologized to her. I said, I'm so sorry. I can do it.
Yeah.
Oh, come
Yes.
on now, seriously?
I'll be
Like,
a good girl.
right, it's okay. It's okay. I'll do it, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
everything's fine,
I
right?
could
That very
totally, yeah.
people pleasing kind of like, but I love you, right? And I don't want you to leave. So, I can do it. I can do it. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
And
And
that's a shame because if she was a good therapist, the thing is, like with therapy, in the past that I've had, when therapy's over a couple years later, you can be friends with your therapist, but it's like you can't be friends with your therapist in the middle of it.
right,
I know and you're telling a, ethical reason why not. You know what I mean? Like it's just,
people can get hurt.
yeah,
And so I was kind of in the middle of it and she started blaming me. Like
yeah,
she told me like, "Well, I don't want to lose my license because you throw a tantrum."
yeah,
And I don't want to lose. She started putting the license. She was hanging the license over my head.
right,
Um, and then I ended up with like secondary trauma from the stuff
okay,
that she was telling me,
yeah,
right? And it wasn't a good dynamic.
right,
And eventually she told me, I want to transfer your case to another doctor.
okay,
And she wasn't even, she was an intern, right? But I want to transfer your case to someone else at
yeah,
the organization. And don't worry, we're still going to see each other. We're going to be friends now. It's just, I'm not going to be your therapist anymore. So she transfers my case. And I remember one time I was doing neurofeedback and the therapist had to come in order for insurance to cover it. And she
hmm,
was holding me on the couch and somebody walked in and saw us.
okay,
And
and
I said to her, did you know that so and so saw us? And she's like, no. She's like, this can't happen. We
okay.
can't have this happen here anymore. And we can't talk about us here.
And so, did you
And
know that it wasn't okay for her to be hugging you or holding you in any way or anything like that?
I must have known somewhere within me that it wasn't okay because I was protecting her.
Right,
I was trying to protect her. But I've been kind of conditioned to not trust my own judgment because of my childhood.
right.
When you live in gaslighting, you
Yes.
end up gaslighting yourself.
Oh,
And
of
now the
course.
therapist was gaslighting me, and I'm gaslighting myself. And now I don't know what to believe, and I'm desperate for the love. So now I'm clinging,
Right.
right? And I valued her,
It's a perfect
right?
storm.
And so she started turning everything around on me, and this is your fault. And then she would be really nice to me one minute, and then she would lash out at me in the next minute. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing wrong.
Right.
And eventually it came a point where I couldn't live in my apartment anymore because I had roaches, and she ended up taking me to her house. And that's when things really went bad because that's a no-no. Now
Right.
her family knows who I am.
Right. Of
HIPAA's been
course.
violated.
Right.
I slept in her daughter's bed.
Yeah.
And I look back now and it makes me nauseous, right? Like
Yeah.
because it was so bad.
Right.
And they were so kind to me when I was there, but then she started getting funny and I could tell she was pulling away. But
Hmm.
every time I brought it up to her, she's like, no, no, I'm not. That's not happening.
Right.
More gaslighting, right? So
Right.
now I'm just completely confused. And she told me that her career and her life and her family's lives are all on me.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I went from protecting my mom to protecting this grown professional with a license. And I felt completely responsible for the well being of this person.
Yeah.
And it was awful. And I started drinking, right? Like I couldn't handle it. I was drinking, I was smoking. It was
Right.
just really bad.
Right.
And finally, one day, I actually dreamt this. I had a dream that she told me that her husband threatened to leave her if she didn't cut me off. And I don't know if that's true, but long story short, I dreamt that she was cutting me off. And I woke up the next morning to a text from her cutting me off.
Wow.
And it was awful. It was awful. You're not supposed to do that.
Right.
You're not supposed to do that. You can't get that close to somebody and set up a dynamic and then change the boundary like that. And the way she said it, because she texted me and she said, now that I am no longer your therapist anymore, it's best that you do not continue to contact me.
Yeah, and that's
Huh?
terrible. Yeah, that whole thing of gaslighting you into saying like this was all your idea from the beginning kind of thing.
Yeah. So then I went for my appointment that day, and the doctor looked at me and said, "You're obsessed with her."
Mm,
And I said, "No, who told you that?" And I kept saying, "Who told you that? Who told you that?" So
right.
now it's my fault. And I said,
Oh.
we were friends." And the lady laughed at me and she looked at me and she said, "I can assure you that you were never friends." So now nobody believes me and I'm realizing that they turned the whole thing on me.
Oh my gosh. And then, oh well, gosh.
So now Kelsey's crazy. This
Yeah.
girl's crazy. And I'm a good target because I was already in therapy. So I'm the best. I'm an easy target. It's easy for them to twist it and turn it back around so that she's delusional and this didn't happen.
Right.
And, we were never that close. And I remember saying to the doctor, "How do you think I got to her house? She picked me up."
Right.
Hello, right? Like I didn't show up
Oh
there.
my
She picked me
gosh.
up and took me there. I slept in her child's bed. It's sick, right? Like when I think back.
Yeah.
And so now
How
this is
did you?
where the
Oh,
institutionalized abuse comes
okay.
in. This was my first
Well, we've been
kind of
talking about it.
experience.
That's
Right,
all institutionalized abuse, but
right.
continue.
And so there's one good thing
Okay.
that really came out of this. And God told me before I came on with you to talk, make sure that you tell the story of how the worst thing that ever happened to you is the best thing that ever happened to you.
Okay. Yes.
And that's like the highlight of the story because I believe that there's a positive in everything if you
Yeah.
care to look for it, right?
Right. Right.
Um, but she told me that Jesus loved me.
Oh.
The therapist that abused me is also the woman that led me to Christ.
Yeah.
Strange dynamic, right? But God
Right.
works in some funny ways. And
Yeah.
when you think about therapy, right? I hate to say it, but what happened with this therapist was the worst thing that has ever happened to me. It was
Right.
the most traumatizing thing that's ever happened to me. Not my mom dying,
Yeah.
not my childhood, not finding my mom dead. With my mom, I expected the worst and I hoped for the best. But with this therapist, you go into therapy with the
Yeah.
worst and you expect that the best is going to come out of it and that they're going to help you. But this woman exploited my vulnerabilities and she
Right.
played on them and she used me to some extent to fill her own void of, oh, my daughters don't talk to me. Well, gee, I wonder why.
Right.
Right. Like, so, but she told me that Jesus loved me
Yeah.
and she gave me her Bible. There was a lot of beautiful moments with her. Again, intermittent reinforcement, right?
Of
That up
course.
and
Yeah.
down all the time.
Right.
There's a lot of beautiful moments with her. And she gave me her Bible. And I remember I was like, I'm going to be a stripper. And she was like, please don't do that. She's
Mm-hmm.
like, you don't have to do that. You're beautiful. Jesus loves you. And I'm like, wow. And she helped me find a non denominational church. I was raised Catholic,
Okay.
a lot of religion, a lot of legalism. And I grew up thinking that God hated me because why else would I have gone through all of this
Right.
horrible, horrible stuff?
Right.
And she sent me Bible verses every morning to try to encourage me. And so it wasn't all bad, right? I don't think the lady is a completely awful human being. There's definitely
Right.
something wrong, right? Boundary issues and things like that.
Yes.
But she really crossed a lot of lines and she put it all on me. There was no accountability. She was not accountable to me. She lied about it. They lied about it. And the whole agency turned against me. They used to sneak her out the back door like I was some type of monster.
Wow.
Um, they treated me when I walked in there like I was like an axe murderer, like I was somebody to be
Yeah.
afraid of. And they manipulated situations and they told people that I was dangerous and they told people that I
Oh
was
my
manipulative. They
gosh.
told people that I was crazy and they tampered with my medical records.
That's horrible.
Like it was really, really bad. They filed a restraining order against me that the judge threw out.
This is, oh my gosh.
I mean, when we talk institutionalized abuse, like this is like a huge example. This one lady did something wrong, and then everybody else was trying to cover their own asses. So they
Right.
all came together, flipped the narrative, right? We'll make the girl's mentally ill anyway. The girl's crazy anyway.
Right.
So it got turned around on me, and eventually I had to leave there. And it was a really, really bad time, and I ended up having a nervous breakdown,
Hmm.
and I ended up checking myself in
Yeah.
to a hospital because I knew that if I didn't do it in that moment, that I was going to kill myself, right?
Right.
And it was the most traumatizing thing. Not only was it abuse, right? Like I realize now it kind of followed a pattern of what one might call narcissistic abuse, right? I can't diagnose that. I can't say for sure, but it definitely followed a cycle of abuse, right?
Right.
To where that discard happened. And
Yes.
now I'm trauma bonded, right?
Right.
So now like now I don't know how to deal with this. And that trauma bond was so strong.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what happened to me.
Right.
So I didn't, it was just awful. And I ended up checking myself in. And then before the 3 days, the 72 hours was up, I got out. Then
Mm-hmm.
I got physically ill. I was in the hospital, right? It was awful. I lived my life for a long time after that, not wanting to live.
Yeah.
And there were nights that I would take my medication with alcohol and hope that it would kill me and look like an accident, just like my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of familiar stuff that was repeating.
Right.
And I remember going to see a psychiatrist to try to get help. And the psychiatrist asked me if I'd been through trauma. And I told them what happened with the therapist. And they said to me, no, no, I mean real trauma.
Oh my gosh.
And so nobody believed me. It was her against me, and they didn't believe me.
Well, emotional abuse, like, we talked about that, even before in your childhood. If you weren't being hit, you know, and people don't see it, sometimes they don't believe it. And it's like they're just because you can't see the scars doesn't mean they're not there.
Right. Not to mention, it wasn't helpful that she was really good at manipulating the situation. She
Right.
was really good at making herself the victim. She told somebody that she was in therapy because of what I did to her.
My goodness
Right? So just
gracious.
a full like turnaround of events. There was no accountability,
Yeah.
lied to people, lied to other professionals in the community that knew the truth. Oh, I didn't do that. That didn't happen. She
Right.
manipulated me. She's this, she's that. So just the smear campaign is really what we're talking about here.
Right.
They came after my reputation. That restraining order, like though that could have ruined my life.
Yeah.
I was 18 years old, 19 years old, right? Like that could have ruined my life. And I look back and I realize there's a lot of things I did wrong, right? There's a lot of
Right.
things that I wish I would have done differently, but I was trying to navigate this the best that I could. And all I wanted was a conversation. All I wanted was to be heard and
Yeah.
acknowledged. And a big trigger for me, my two biggest triggers and pet peeves
Uh-huh.
are a lack of accountability
Yeah.
and not being heard, being ignored, right?
Right.
Those because I was ignored throughout my childhood. Nobody heard me. I
Right.
had to assert myself and be tough, right, in order to be heard. And I had to scream and yell in order to be heard. And then nobody in my childhood was ever accountable to me. And then that only got amplified with the therapist because she rid herself of any and all responsibility. That lady stripped me of my dignity and my humanity and my
Yeah.
sanity,
Yeah.
right? And was
And
not
all you
accountable for it.
wanted, all you wanted was, I have had a traumatic childhood. I would like to get therapy so that I can
Right.
get better.
Right. And then
Oh
at the
my
end, all I
goodness.
wanted was a conversation. I just wanted to be treated like a human being and be
Yeah.
spoken to and validated. I'm sorry, right, that I did this to you. I was
Well,
wrong. I crossed boundaries. It
and
wasn't
that's the
happening.
well, no, and we have to, I learned years ago people saying, heard it a few times, say that the person who hurt you may not be the person who heals you, because you
Hence
may,
trauma bonding, right?
yes, you may never get that apology. I'm not holding my breath that my ex-husband's ever apologizing for anything
Right.
because he doesn't think he did anything. You know what I mean? So,
Well, that's the problem. That's the frightening part.
yes, that is the
And
frightening part.
it took many years of fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting to try to finally get the state and people involved to
Right.
come back and validate and say, no, okay, what she did was wrong.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
I mean, it took a lot of years of fighting to
Mm-hmm.
finally get somebody
Mm-hmm.
to say, no, 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 this was wrong. Like this was borderline illegal, right? Like
Well,
this
and
was
now,
not
I mean, it
okay.
sounds illegal to me, and the thing, because especially with the medical records and everything, and as even people not saying that it was illegal and all those things. We know it was wrong. Like
I
in our
mean,
heart, we know it was
HIPAA,
wrong.
that's a federal offense. You can go to prison for violating HIPAA like that.
Just so many boundaries crossed
Like,
because I don't want people to get scared of therapy because I love
no,
therapy and I'm in
it,
therapy all the time and I just love it. It's great. But I don't let
trust
me
your instincts.
trust your instincts, but let me tell you, I know nothing about my therapist and I like it that way. I
There were so
know.
many red flags, and I look back and I'm like, wow, what an idiot, right? Like, I
Well,
missed
but
it.
don't beat yourself up too much because, yes, now that, healthier looking back, right? We're healthy. We can look back and go, oh my gosh. But the same for me. Like 21-year-old Laura, like I feel bad for her because I know
I
exactly
do,
why,
yeah.
I know exactly why I went with the guys I did and married my husband and all that. I totally know why because there was a need inside of me that needed to be filled that I
Right,
didn't that I didn't have. And so, but healthy 2023 Laura, no, she's good.
right.
Like she's not
Well, you know
gonna.
what's awful? The trauma bond to this lady lasted for years. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get over it. I ended
Okay.
up with survivor's guilt. I blamed myself. I got her in trouble. I got her in trouble,
Oh,
right?
right.
Like
Oh my
I I
gosh.
had so
Yes.
much guilt. Like, oh, what I
Yeah.
did to them, what I did to them. Nah. I used to call myself a home wrecker.
Oh, I'm
I was
glad
like,
you
I'm a
don't
home
say.
wrecker.
I'm glad you don't say
Like,
that anymore.
no, because I was a client and she was responsible, right? And this is the part of my life where I have to allow people to have consequences for their own behavior,
Yeah.
right? But I was so trauma bonded, it lasted years. And
Yeah.
then I went from that abusive relationship to another one.
Oh my gosh. Well, wait a second. Let's talk about trauma bonding for a second.
Sure.
The thing is that it can last for years. I mean, it's
I
so
didn't
hard.
know.
I know, and it's so hard to break. You were already in the CPTSD, right? You were in
Oh,
the
yeah. I was in the
complex.
heat of it.
Yeah, you
My
were in
mom
the
wasn't even gone a year before I met this lady. I didn't have a chance, right?
right.
Like,
So you're in this complex PTSD and all the things. And then you get into this situation. And what happens is that with trauma bonding, it's the person who's hurting you is also the person who's loving you or soothing you. And that's how the trauma bond, it's that, it's bad, good, but from the same person. And so your brain goes, oh, wait, they're giving me good. And so your brain craves it. And when you have such a craving for that love and that soothing, of course, right? You said I had a mother wound. I needed that, when she's taking care of that mother wound, you're like, yes, this is fine. You know what I mean? So I totally get it. I'm still working through my trauma bond.
yeah.
There's,
Well, that and then that they become the person that can make you feel better.
yes,
So
exactly.
now they've destroyed you, right?
Yes.
And they've discarded you. And it's
Yeah.
like, wait,
Right.
please come back. Like, please, let's make
Because
it
the
right because I
person you're
can't
looking for,
tolerate this. Exactly.
right, the person you're looking for to make it better is and especially when it's like final, like with me, right, with the divorce, it was final. So it's like the person I needed to make me better was never going to talk to me ever again. So it's like, what do I do? Like your body and your brain just
It's like coming
craves
off
that.
of drugs.
Oh, it is.
It's like coming off of drugs. It's
Look,
like a physical sensation,
I've never done
like
drugs, but
puking and the whole thing.
yeah, I've never done drugs, but I have to say, I felt like an addict. I'm like, this has got to be because
Well,
I was
because it
like, just
is.
give it to me,
It's
give me a little bit.
it's an addiction,
It
right?
is addiction. Yeah,
It's it's frightening.
it
And I've
is.
never done drugs either, but I know through the research and stuff that I've done,
And
right,
seeing
that
it, and
that
seeing it.
is it is like coming off of it's
Yes,
comparable to coming off of heroin.
yes, and that's what I've heard with your brain and things like that. So, and
It changes the brain chemistry. Yeah.
it really does, and so that's why
The
it's
highs and the lows, the dopamine hits and the drops and the yeah,
that's what
same
it
concept.
is, and why people are just like, hey, just get over it, kind of thing, or
Oh
yeah,
yeah, sure.
screw that guy, kind of thing, and it's like,
No.
no, my brain, like literally, my
Right.
brain doesn't know what to do. My
Like, no, this
brain,
was not a normal relationship, friends. Like, this was not a
right?
normal breakup, right?
It's
If
not
you
just a
would.
breakup where you go, okay, yeah, next, not like that, and especially for me, my God, 33 years, like I'm not doing any next, but it's better every day because I'm working on it with
Right.
therapists who are safe.
Well, and it was so mortifying and devastating because that was an institution that was there that was supposed to help me. And I feel bad, right? Not everybody there was awful, right? The woman
Yeah.
that owned it, this poor woman went on maternity leave.
Oh,
She came back and she's like, what did you people do to my organization? She came back into this mess. And
uh,
again, there's a lot of ways that I handled it
yeah.
poorly.
Yeah.
right? But now that I look back, but she's like, what did you people do? I wasn't gone that long. I came back and you've literally destroyed my organization. Like I feel for
Yeah.
her because she was, she ended up calling me and talking with me and validating me and whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, good.
but she's like, what the heck? What did you guys do?
Yeah.
Right? Like I was only gone a couple months. So
Oh my
that's
gosh.
what she's like, I left you in charge and look at what you did here.
Yeah.
And finally, it had to go to the board and I had to file it. It just
Okay.
got so bad. They slandered me. They tried to ruin my character. But here's the thing. People mistake my kindness for weakness. And I
Yes.
think that's funny
Right.
because I never end up being what they bargained for. And I end
Yeah.
up kicking and screaming because I will fight for myself, right? I will fight for myself. And
Right.
not just for me, I will fight for other people to make sure that it doesn't happen to them. And so that's what I ended up having to do because at that point, right, like that's a threat to the public if that happens again.
Right.
And
And
so
that's
I
it.
came forward because they attacked me, right? Shots fired at me first. Don't file legal charges against me and then just expect me to
Yeah.
sit there
Sit
with
there.
my thumb up
Yeah.
my rear end and just think that you
Right.
can just do that to me,
Right.
right? But God didn't let them touch me.
Yeah.
Like God made it very clear, not you can't touch her, right? And so, but it was devastating because they were supposed to help me.
Yeah.
They were supposed to help me. And I can't reiterate enough that that was the worst, most
Yeah.
awful, traumatizing thing that has ever happened to me. And
I
that has
can
stayed with
imagine.
me. I
Yeah.
have never fully gotten over what that woman did to me. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've projected her into all of my close relationships because I'm afraid of everybody, right? Like every
Okay.
person I've gotten close to after that, I've been afraid of.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've lost some good people
Yeah.
because I was unable to handle a good relationship
Right.
because they got stuck in the therapist box and they didn't even deserve to be there.
Right. So you,
Right.
yeah, and I could totally see that you're trying to protect yourself. I get it because I remember sitting in therapy going, okay, so now that I see things, is everyone a narcissist? And
I
and
went through
my
that moment
therapist was like,
recently.
no.
I went through that too. I had somebody in my life and absolutely love this lady and
Yeah.
we were very very close and relational conflict happens and stuff goes down and we both played a role in that.
Yeah.
And I was like, is she a narcissist?
Right.
And then I was like, oh no, another one, right? But then I had to say, wait, she's just like me. So if she's a narcissist, then I'm a narcissist, and then we're all narcissists, right? So it's just like
Yeah.
it's there's a level of paranoia when you come out of those
Yeah. I li-
relationships.
and I like the way that you said, wait, if is she, and you stopped, right? You stopped and thought about it and then thinking,
Unfortunately, after I had the trauma response though. So after I
well,
talked myself into a hole and I made it worse and everything and I hurt her and she hurt,
yeah.
right? Like, but I'm like, oh no, another one. And I had the trauma response. My brain
Yes.
went back into,
Yeah.
oh no,
I
another
need
one.
to
And
protect myself. I
I have
need to
to
cut
protect
her out.
myself.
Yeah.
I
I
have to
get it.
protect myself and I have to be heard and I have to fight and I have to scream and I have to yell and I have to assert myself and eventually I came down from that and I said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to repeat that because she's
Yeah.
not. That's not what this is,
Right.
right? But after I did some more damage, but
Right.
I had that moment because there was another abusive relationship that I'm sure we're going to get to. But it scared me. It scared me so bad. But that was how I started to learn that there are some behaviors that mimic
Yeah.
narcissistic abuse and those tendencies that aren't rooted in that because
Right.
trauma can look like that. Trauma responses can look like that, right?
Yeah.
So learning how to sort out and not
Right.
be grounded enough to not go right back there. But I freaked. I'm like, oh my God, another one. Like this is the
Right.
third. Oh no. Like I completely
Well,
lost it.
and I think you're right. It's that, you know, in I'm guessing, during this like recovery time and really like you going to safe therapy now? I don't know. Is that
I
what you
did.
did
I did
next?
safe
Okay.
therapy for quite a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're learning, right? That okay, this person and frankly, look, do we need to label everybody? No.
No.
But it's good. I know for me the reason I was like the word narcissism feels good is because I know how to handle what I'm feeling. I know how to handle what
Mhm.
he's doing.
Right.
I know how to I understand it. I always want to understand things. And
Me
your
too.
brain and I think sometimes our brain wants to put logic to an illogical
Always.
situation.
Well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, when something happens and you don't have all the information, your brain goes crazy,
Yeah.
right? Because the mind wants to make sense. So if you have something happen and you don't have all the details,
Yeah.
your brain will fill in details. It will
Yeah.
fill in the gaps. Now, whether or not that's rooted in fact or reality or it's distortion,
Yeah.
right? But if somebody doesn't give you all the details,
Yeah.
your mind will try to fill in those gaps. And that's why the silent treatment or stonewalling
Yes.
is so damaging,
So
because
painful.
it's like that person leaves you to do
Yes.
the emotional heavy lifting. The emotional heavy lifting of what is wrong?
Yeah.
What's wrong? What's
I,
wrong?
I thought
What did I
that
do?
to
What
me
did I do
was,
wrong? And why aren't you talking to me? And how can I fix it?
yes.
Please, I want this to stop so bad. Can you
Yes.
please,
You're
how can I
literally
fix
in pain.
it?
You know,
It's awful.
something I learned was that with the brain,
I know what you're going to say.
well, do you? Well,
I
our
think so.
brain, okay, well, our brain always goes to the negative.
Mhm.
And the reason is because of that, I guess not in the fight or flight, but because of a safety. Our
Yes.
it wants to keep us safe. And so that's why a lot of people who go, like I'm that person. Like if somebody's late, oh, they were in a car accident or whatever it is, right? And
Right.
from what I've understood is that our brain always goes to the negative because our brain is trying to keep us safe. And
Right.
so it's trying to sort it out, and we have to stop ourselves.
Well, and it's also extremely unfair to be left in that predicament, to have to
It
work that
is.
hard,
It is.
right, for somebody else. Like, you shouldn't have to beg, like, to be
Right.
communicated to. No, no, regardless of the intent,
Right.
right? Even with good intent, being ignored
Yeah.
and being left to try to figure out what is wrong and what did I
Yeah.
do and how, especially for somebody with trauma, for somebody that's been through all these things, like, it's awful.
Yeah.
And I actually learned something. So I learned that when you're ignored, it activates the same part of the brain as physical pain. So the brain registers being ignored and silenced as it does physical pain.
Wow. And I can see that. Let me tell you, I think those have been the hardest things that when I had that stonewalling, being ignored. I thought that was pretty hard for me.
It was
I
awful.
really wanted to die
It was,
when
I
when my
understand.
ex, stopped talking to me. I'm just living in the house and he just stopped talking to me because he just wanted to make
Awful.
sure I understood how devalued I was.
Well,
So
and that's actually a form of gaslighting, because then
yes.
what starts to happen is you start to over explain yourself, and you explain how
Yes.
you feel, and
Yes.
then they don't respond.
Yes.
And then you're like, okay, wait, maybe I wasn't clear enough. Let me try
Right.
again. Right. So then you say it, and all of a sudden, you're saying the same thing five, six,
Yeah.
seven different ways, thinking, well, maybe they just don't understand. Maybe it's
Right.
me. Right. Maybe I wasn't clear.
This
So
is a
now
grown
you're
adult that went to college. I think you can
right.
figure it out.
Now you've communicated the same thing over and over and over again. And that's gaslighting. Why? Because you're questioning your reality.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't clear enough. Let me dumb it down again.
Right.
Hi, you're hurting me. You're hurting me. You're hurting me. I'm in pain. This was
Yeah.
hurtful. Yeah, please talk to me. You're saying the same thing over and over,
Right.
right? And now you're blaming yourself. Oh, I wasn't clear. Well, maybe they didn't understand. No,
Yeah.
no, no. They understood, right? And it makes you question your reality some more.
Right. So, you said you had some other well, I don't know if we're going to get into those, but I want to know, like, okay, so you had a couple of other, relationships where you had some uh emotional abuse or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. It was toxic. But tell me, what have you done really? Are you in a place now where you feel like you're starting to understand it a lot more? It sounds like you are. But,
Oh, absolutely.
what have you done? Um, what have you been doing really that
Yeah.
has been helping? And then also, one of the things you wanted to talk about was like where you're at now and like
Yeah.
how you're helping others.
Absolutely. So just to give a little bit of background very briefly, so I also experienced a second round of institutionalized abuse with a religious organization.
Yeah.
Eerily similar situation.
Okay.
Very, very eerie when I look at it. Um, it was more personal than professional. There was a professional side, there was a personal side, right? Kind of an
Okay.
enmeshment, right, of boundaries. Same kind of concept. Another older woman,
Yeah.
um,
So
poor
touching that mother
relationships.
wound.
Yep. Poor
Okay.
relationship with her daughter.
Yeah.
Um, Kind of clung to me,
Hmm.
started telling everybody this is my adopted daughter. Bing, bang, boom.
Okay.
Devaluing starts. Very, very
Okay.
stressful. Trauma bond.
Yeah.
Discarded. And then I come to find out that it wasn't even her idea to discard me,
Okay.
right? She was being abused and manipulated by somebody else at the church. And
Yeah.
then when I started to speak out about what happened to me, they started telling me to stop talking about it.
Yeah. And that's
Stop
why
talking about
and
it.
that's why we're
You
doing a
know,
podcast.
right. Oh, tell me
we're
about it.
we're not gonna stop talking.
No. So, stop talking about it, the gaslighting. Well, that wasn't abuse and that didn't happen. And
Yeah.
if it was so bad, why did you stay and why didn't you just leave? Right. I ended up I
Yeah.
couldn't serve anywhere anymore. I mean, I gave 3 years of my life to that church. I loved this woman. Like, I
Yeah.
loved these people. And it wasn't all bad. Again, that intermittent reinforcement, but
Right.
similar situation. Again, very damaging because this is a spiritual organization. This is a church
It's supposed
that
to
is
be
supposed to
safe.
represent Jesus. It's supposed to be safe,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And of course, in the midst of all of that, I'm a student at UNLV and I'm going through a lot. I'm severely suicidal. I'm going through all this stuff. And it's a great example of how there are institutions
Mm.
in the community that harm people,
Yeah.
right? That are supposed to help people and they have a responsibility and they don't do right by people. But then there are other institutions in the community that come forward and they fill in the gap, and UNLV was that for me. And
Wow.
it's very exciting to get to say that I'm sitting at UNLV right now because after graduation they hired me,
That's
right?
so
And so
awesome.
UNLV did right by me.
Yeah.
It was a professor at this university that saved my life when I wanted to die, and I drove out into the desert and I didn't want to come back, and I didn't know if I was going to come back.
Yeah.
And that woman walked through hell with me. And it was because of her and that protective factor and the love and the kindness that she showed me that I had her voice in the back of my head when I drove out there. And
Yeah.
ultimately that's why I came back. And so there's institutions that harm people, but then there's institutions that come in, right, and filled in the gap for the
Yeah.
spiritual organization, filled in the gap for the counseling center. I mean,
Yeah.
the leadership at the UNLV Honors College in that season of my life when I was being abused by the church
Yeah.
showed me more love
Wow.
than the leadership at that church. And the church loved me
Yeah.
until I stepped out of line and I stopped conforming. And then they revoked that. And
Right.
then it was like, oh, yeah, everybody against me, the smear campaign, like the whole thing went down.
Right. And
And so,
it's interesting because I don't know that people realize that how institutions themselves can be narcissistic in the regard of,
100%.
you know, it doesn't have to be one person, but there's um it's almost, like one person does it and there's just a culture. Let's just say that. There's just a
Well,
culture in certain
yeah.
institutions.
And it's like politics, right? And position and status. And
Right.
good people will abandon their moral compass and sacrifice their integrity to stay in good standing with the institution. And then they look back and they're like, oh my God, what did I do?
Yeah.
Right. But it can become very toxic, and people will put their status over the well-being and the humanity of other people, and it's sad to watch good people fall into that trap and then look back and realize that they hurt somebody because they threw their morals and their ethics out the window because
Right.
somebody put pressure on them to conform. And so,
Well, and that's the thing is I'm just thinking like we don't even know their story because
right,
there's levels of just like your grandmother, right? We don't know she was codependent, she was dealing with her
right,
own stuff and then all the other things. And so we don't know what other people are going through. They're going through their issues, but all it's doing is causing pain if they're not dealing with it because they have their reasons why they can't leave or they don't want to leave or they don't want to speak up,
or they don't
right?
want to do the right thing by the other individual because they're scared, and now they're probably being manipulated, right? Like
Right,
it
exactly.
gets really squirrely with
It does.
institutions.
It does.
And but I look at it and I'm like, wow, the people at UNLV treated me better than
Well, I'm glad to hear that you were
the
able to
right, like
have somebody.
UNLV
Yeah,
saved my life in more way than one because I got out here to come here. And
that's good.
it's great, but it's sad because
Yeah. Well, of
where's the
course.
disconnect? But
Well, of course, it's a church. You think that people would be representing that Jesus that you know that loves others. And so it's
What
hard
what
because,
a representation to give of Jesus. Like that's frightening.
well, it is.
Frightening.
It is. And of course, churches are made of humans, but you don't have to stay in a place where you're being abused. You know what I
Well,
mean?
no, and
And
unfortunately, when you have unhealthy or toxic people in
yeah,
upper leadership,
right. It trickles
what
down.
is up comes down,
Correct.
right? So,
Yep.
and if you're unwilling to uproot the toxicity,
Yeah.
then it's going to contaminate the whole organization. I saw a quote and it said that the culture of any organization is determined by the worst behavior that the leader of that organization is willing to tolerate.
Wow. That is so true. My
And that's
goodness.
basically it. And so when institutionalized abuse is its own demon because
It really, it's such a big, oh my gosh. I mean, we could talk forever on it. It's so big. So, talk to me about what you're doing,
yeah.
like your chaplaincy and all these things that
Yeah.
you do. How are you helping everybody with
Well,
coming
so
out of this?
after I got out of this last what
Yeah.
I will call an emotionally abusive relationship. Again, I played a role in that. I
Of
bring things to
course.
the table, right?
Yep.
I ended up going to starting a Celebrate Recovery
Okay.
program, which is a 12-step
Yeah.
Christian program, but it's not just for drugs and alcohol. It's also for hurts, habits, and hangups, right? Whatever you're
Yes.
dealing with. And so I
And we have
realized,
mentioned it on the show before,
okay,
and so
cool.
we'll put the link because
Perfect.
it has been mentioned by so many people.
It's
So
really been helping me.
yeah,
And
and
so I went,
it's nationwide, so people
it's
can join it.
fantastic.
Yeah,
And I went for the first time the day before my college graduation because I realized, oh no, I'm codependent. Oh no, I need help. I don't ever want to go through this again.
yeah.
Because I realized, okay, one similar situation, two similar situation, three
Three
similar
similar.
situation. Okay, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah,
What is within me that is unhealed that I keep ending up in these situations? Because obviously I am doing something or not doing something that I'm slipping into these situations. And so that's
yes,
when I started going to CR. And so that's been very, very helpful. Um, I will touch on some of the stuff that I do, but I would like to touch
sure,
on the recovery part.
sure.
The chaplaincy is great. Like
Yeah,
I work in public service, right? All of that's great. I love to help people. But I've learned that you can't be effective in truly helping and supporting other people if you're a wreck and you can't
correct.
heal within yourself. And so I started CR and I started going through this process of walking through the steps. My favorite one is that my life has become unmanageable and I am powerless over my mess, right? Like that has been empowering for me because it's like a, my life was unmanageable, and B, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix it. And that's where I'm like, I need Jesus. And so that's been
Yeah.
kind of how I've been walking this out. But I finally came to realize that I was looking externally to fix an internal problem.
Okay.
And so I didn't love myself. I didn't value myself. I have been abused until the cows come home, right? I have been stomped on and people have wiped their feet on me and I've had stuff spoken into my life, lies told over me.
Yeah.
And I finally realized that this is within me. I'm looking out here to fix something that I need to fix with God. It needs to come here, not
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I realized that even if every single person in my life was perfect, even if all those women that came in my adulthood were perfect and they all loved me great and they all encouraged me, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
They could encourage me and tell me I'm great all day, but I didn't believe them.
Right.
And so that was when I realized I have to heal so that I can learn to love myself.
Yes.
And so that has kind of been the journey that I've been on. And with that, I've been looking back into my childhood and allowing myself to really pick apart that dynamic and make sense of it. And so what I've come to now is I realize that I've been basically living in abuse for
Mhm.
25 years and this is the first time that I've gotten out. And
Yeah.
that's scary,
Right.
right? Because I look back now and I'm going to use some terms here. I'm not diagnosing anybody. I'm
Yeah.
not sticking anything anywhere, but just to get an understanding, my grandfather was highly narcissistic, right? He was abusive. He was abusive to my grandmother,
Okay.
emotionally, verbally, and she was pretty codependent, right? So that started that dynamic. They had three children.
Yeah.
Their two sons and my mom. My mom was in the middle. and all three of them ended up on drugs.
Yeah.
And I always said to myself, what went wrong? Because something obviously went wrong and I didn't understand the dynamic.
Right.
But one of my uncles is highly codependent. One of my other uncles, the other one, is highly narcissistic. And
Okay.
then my mother had borderline personality disorder. So
Okay.
my mom ended up in the middle. And now that I understand that, now I get why she was the way she was.
Right.
And my grandfather was abusive to her. My uncle was abusive to her,
Yeah.
right? So she was in a lot of pain, right? That lady went through so much.
Right.
And so she was just coping the best that she could. So she ended up with my father, right? Highly narcissistic, abusive.
Yeah.
Now you have somebody that deals with, BPD with somebody that is very narcissistic, right?
Right.
Creates a mess. Oh, along comes Kelsey.
That's right.
Yay. Right. So now I'm born into this mess. My mom leaves my dad, goes home. So, for a lack of, this is going to be abrasive, but I'm just going to say it.
Yeah.
I was raised in a home with a narcissistic codependent and a borderline. And everybody wants to know, I'm not trying to be derogatory when I say that, but everybody wants to know why Kelsey struggled. Well, it shouldn't surprise anybody,
Right.
right? Then I come along and I'm raised in this. And I realize now that it was a really good thing that my father wasn't around
Yeah.
because I didn't have the father wound, I had the mother wound. God saved me a lot of pain
Yeah.
because I was drawn toward those women.
Yeah.
And so as I've been going through this process, I'm realizing, wait a minute, abuse or narcissistic abuse, right? If you want to call it that,
Yeah.
runs in my family.
Right.
My grandparents, my mom, right? And I realized, oh, wait, I can break this.
Yeah.
This ends with me. This is
That's
done. We're
awesome.
done, right? Because I've been through these relationships and I've been through the thing. Listen, I can spot that behavior from 10 feet away. Get away from me. Get
Yeah.
away from me,
Yeah.
right? And so throughout this healing, I had to start walking away from people, from things. I had to start setting boundaries. I had to start asserting myself. I had to start telling people I don't deserve this, right? And if you are not able to leverage with me here, right, I have to walk away from you
Yeah.
because I refuse to ever lose myself
Yeah.
in anything like that ever again. And I wish somebody had told me when I started my recovery how hard that would be,
Oh,
how
yeah.
much I would lose. I lost people that I
Yeah.
love dearly.
Yeah.
And will God restore it? Probably. He already is, right?
Right.
But I couldn't lose myself again. I refused after that second one with the
Yeah.
church to
Yeah.
lose myself again. And so
Right.
this has been the process that I've been on because I realize now, okay, I can heal and I am healing and I'm doing 1,000 times better between going to therapy and going through Celebrate Recovery and
Yeah.
getting closer to God and prioritizing my relationship with Him and learning myself and reconnecting with myself and really getting to a place where I value myself and I'm walking in that power.
Yeah.
I'm not going to end up with a narcissistic man. So guess what? My
Yeah.
kids don't have to have that happen to them. And
Yes.
this is where it becomes a testimony for God. Like, yes, okay, so
Yeah.
all of this happened to me and it was horrible. And I spent a
Yes.
lot of my life trying to figure out what went wrong. And now God has given me the information as to, oh, this is what went wrong. This is how I can fix it.
Yes.
And I don't have to do to my children what was done to me and they don't have to go through that.
Oh my
And so this
gosh.
has been the two biggest lessons were like, okay, I don't love and value myself. And that's why I was ending up there. I had a vulnerability. So part of me was attracting these people because I was very vulnerable and they could see that. But part of me was attracting them because I was strong,
Yeah.
because I am intelligent,
Right.
right?
Of
I'm not
course.
even, not
Yeah.
even was, I am strong, right? I
Right.
am intelligent. I am
Right.
highly empathetic. I love people. Those two things, high empathy and high vulnerability, make you a big target for abuse,
Right.
right? And that lack of self-worth and that lack of value,
Right.
all the
Right.
trauma, right? That makes you a target. And so now that I've started to really heal and walk in my power and walk in the authority that Jesus has given me, I'm not attracting so many people like that anymore. And when I
Yeah.
do, I can say, I'm going to keep you over there. And I'm actually attracting a lot of really great people. I have healthy relationships. I have a great job.
That's
Um,
amazing.
Ironically enough, I work in suicide prevention now, so God has a funny sense
Yes.
of humor,
That's
right?
right. No, but he's gonna, turn your mess into a message, and that's the thing. I'm so with you on the it ends with me.
It
Um,
ends with me. We're done. I'm never doing this again.
you and
Not
I
to
are,
my kids, not
we
to
are
me.
done. No, we are done. I'm
Woo!
telling you,
Free
oh,
freedom.
I am telling you, I will not allow this to move forward. I just am fighting so hard for my kids right now. You know, they're
Absolutely.
grown, but it doesn't matter. You know, I just talk to them and because I just won't. I won't do it anymore.
No,
I see all the stuff in my family and I'm like, I as exhausting as it is to go to therapy and all that, you know, when no one
it's
else
hard
wants
work.
to. It's a lot of hard work and when
It's
no one else
painful.
wants to, let me tell you, I just don't care because there was something you were saying about, you know, this was the hand you were dealt, right? You could have ended up like the rest of your family, and nobody, like, listening to your story, nobody would be surprised and be right, but instead you said no, it's got to end with me. I'm decided because so many I've heard so often, well, you know, I my mom was a drug addict, I guess I'm gonna be, kind of thing, where it's like you just spoke into the world, you just spoke over
Right.
yourself, this, you're speaking death over yourself, you know, and it's like, don't.
Life and death is in, power of life and death is in the tongue.
That's right. And
And then you have
so,
other people speaking it over you. So when you have other
right,
people speaking this trash over you,
right.
right? Like, of course you're going to end up believing that.
But
And
that's why it's
then,
so important to fight for yourself and fight for that
absolutely.
self worth, that self love. And really, I'm also a woman of faith. And so knowing who God says I am and how much
Right.
He loves me, that was a big game changer for me.
And
Saying,
uprooting the false beliefs, right? Because I
yes,
mean, I look at people, and there was a while where I'm like, wow, I'm disposable, right? When people
right.
discard you and they
Yes,
throw you away, they just like delete you out of their life. They
right,
block you, they delete you. There's no dialogue, and these are
right,
people that you love, right? That thought you loved
right,
you, and it
right.
messes up your head so
It
bad.
does.
But then it's like, wow, you just threw me away like I was a piece of garbage.
And I'm
Like,
not a piece of garbage.
well, I realize that now, right?
No,
But
but
that false
that's what I'm
belief
saying.
thing, right?
It's the
Like I
false
believed that
belief.
for a long time. I'm disposable.
Yes.
I'm trash. People throw me away. Like people leave. I'm not lovable.
And it's hard
Garbage,
to
right?
know
Like
that.
it's not true.
And that's the thing that we have to remember is just because it's happening and just because someone is saying it doesn't make it true. Because I have to tell you, I went through that same thing. The whole discard thing, oh my gosh, that
It's
was the worst.
awful.
It was so awful. Like after 33 years, and I was literally thrown away like trash. I was like,
Oh yeah.
I don't understand. Like my brain didn't understand. I didn't understand. And I kept saying, I'm trash, all this stuff. And he just threw me away like trash.
Oh yeah.
And I had so many friends over me going, you're not trash. Stop acting.
Right.
You are not trash. But I had to say it. I am a big, you know, proponent of sticking sticky notes all
Yeah.
over my mirror,
I have some at
scripture,
my desk.
yeah, scripture,
Affirmations,
happy word, any
scriptures.
affirmations, anything. Like
What
I
does
would get
God? Who does God say I am? I am. I am. I am. It's all written out at my
anything,
desk.
right? And if something would come to me, not I'm not a piece of trash. No. I am worthy. I am loved. That kind of
Yes.
thing. Don't put the negative.
A double negative.
Yeah,
Double
don't put
negatives don't work,
no,
right?
double negatives don't work.
Right.
You have to, and not necessarily the fake it till you make it thing, but just if we can speak poorly of ourselves and that locks in our neurons, okay, our neurons start firing and saying, okay, we're trash, we have to then stop ourselves and say, I am
Taking
worthy,
every
I
thought
am loved.
captive. Yes.
Every thought captive. It's it's not easy. Look, none of this is easy. It gets easier
Right.
because I have to tell you, a year ago I was not this person. A year ago I
Uh-uh.
was like I'm trash.
3 months ago, I wasn't this person.
Right. And now I'm like, oh no, I am no, you would be lucky to be my
Well,
to be
right.
married to
I look
me or
at
to be my
people,
friend or whatever, you know.
right. I'm like, wait a minute. You walked away from who? That was not smart,
Right.
right? Like, that's not the brightest thing you've ever done, right? Because
Right.
I am the greatest friend, right?
Yeah.
When I love you, right?
Yeah.
I will go to the end of the earth for you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I will be in your corner. I will be loyal. right? I will have your back, right? Like
Right.
I'm a good catch, right? Like
Right.
I'm
It's
dedicated.
so funny. I say that too. I say,
I love
I'm a
people.
catch.
Wait a minute. And so that's another big lesson that I learned in all of this, is that I personalized things for so long.
Yeah.
And I finally was able to step back and observe, right? It's almost like an out of body experience when you
Yeah.
remove yourself from yourself and you just observe people's behavior. And I learned people's behavior has a lot more to do with them and not a whole lot about you,
Oh, yeah.
right? If somebody is unable to communicate with you, that's not on me,
Right.
right? Like if they can't have that conversation with me, that's not about me. They're going through something, and that's helped me to be able to have empathy. Now, not to say that empathy excuses
Right.
poor behavior. And the other thing I've learned is that unconditional love is not equal to unconditional tolerance. You can love someone from a distance and pray for them and love them and
Yes.
continue to support them, right? Without being in the
In
line
their
of fire
life. Okay.
with whatever is there that they're dealing with, because you can only do so much, right? And you can only help so much.
Right.
But to unconditionally love someone doesn't mean you have to unconditionally expose yourself
Yeah.
to pain,
Yes.
right? And so being able to set boundaries are the greatest thing that have ever happened to me. It's
Yes.
very empowering to be like,
It
I
is.
love you.
Yes.
However, I don't love this behavior. So if we're not able to come meet in the middle, I am going to have to set a boundary
Yes.
to protect myself,
Yes.
right? Because this is not healthy. This isn't the greatest dynamic, and I really care about you and I really want to work this out. However, if you're not able to do that right now, then I'm going to have to step away
Yes.
because this is hurting me and I will not lose myself, right?
Right.
I will not be disrespected,
Right.
right? Like being ignored, that's disrespectful,
Hmm.
right? And I understand that there's dynamics and there's things, right, that happen and life is hard, but at the end of
Right.
the day, it's disrespectful, right? So I will
It
not be
is.
disrespected, right? You can't pull the wool over my eyes anymore. I will not be manipulated. I'm not a doormat,
Right.
right? I'm not doing this whole people pleasing thing anymore, right? Like I'm learning how to say no. And to bring it kind of back around, all of these changes has helped me be able to help others better.
Yes.
And there was a saying that I used to hate it when people would say this to me, but you can't love others until you love yourself.
Yes.
I don't like that version of it. However, I just lost the thought. There's another way to say it.
Oh, okay.
Um, but basically, like your ability to love yourself reflects your ability to love others. So you can, here it is. You can only love others as much as you love
Oh,
yourself.
okay. Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So I definitely loved people, but that doesn't mean I loved them in a healthy way. That didn't make it healthy.
Yes.
Right. But
Yes.
I'm learning now that I truly am stepping into the season where I love myself, right? I value myself. I respect myself.
Yes.
I'm a much better friend
Right.
because of it. I am able to love people in a healthy way. I'm able to support them in a healthy way. I'm not trying to fix people anymore, right?
Right.
Because loving someone and fixing them are not the same thing, right?
Right.
Recognizing that, okay, you made these decisions
Yeah.
and now you have consequences for said decisions,
Right.
right? That you had a responsibility to protect yourself, right? You did not do that in whatever capacity.
Right.
Um, my nature is to want to come in and say, I'm sorry, I want to.
Oh,
No, no, no.
sure.
People have to have the space to learn their own lessons and
Yes.
navigate their own journeys, right?
Hmm.
And deal with their own consequences without Kelsey coming in and trying to fix and trying to make better. And that's hard,
Right.
right?
Because it's not your responsibility, and that's the
No, we
thing
all
is
have to
it's
be responsible and accountable for our own selves. We
yes.
all make decisions. There are consequences for decisions, right? And that belongs to them, and my part belongs to me. So I'm
Right.
going to be accountable for my part, right?
Right.
I apologize. I did this X, Y, and Z. I would do this different, but all that stuff
Right.
that's on you, right? So you have to deal with that. Um, right? And that codependency piece, just trying not to fix people and fix people's problems and take people's
Right.
problems on so much that they become mine. There's only so much I can do for
Right.
people. They also have to work on them. So all of this that I've learned and I am putting into action and I'm walking out every single day is making me a better chaplain. It's making
Yes.
me a better friend. It's making me a better employee. It's making me a better public servant, right? Like it's making me better at what I do already because ultimately I'm taking care of Kelsey and I'm
Yes.
making Kelsey a priority so I can show up
Right.
for the people in my life
Well, you
to the
can be the
best of my
best.
ability.
Well, that's the thing is you can be the best Kelsey there is so that you are because the world needs you, all of us. Okay? The world
Absolutely.
needs us to show up as our true authentic self. Your true authentic self is you not being just selfish, but
Right.
really saying, I value myself enough to say yes to this and no to that. And it's okay. Even just hear me, people, because if you don't know how to set boundaries, we're going to put a link down below for healthy boundaries.
Resources,
No,
absolutely.
I'm telling you, healthy boundaries. Even though literally you can Google healthy boundaries and how it does it, how to do it. Because if you've never done it, you don't know how to do it, and it feels awkward. And the people who are going to complain are the people who have
Benefited from
benefited.
you not having
That's
any.
right. They have benefited from you not having boundaries, and they're going to complain. And so you're going to think that it's wrong to set a boundary, but it's not because
No.
the louder they're yelling or the more that they're protesting, it's even more to show you that I had a friend who asked me to do something recently, and I messaged her and I said, "No, I won't be doing that." And I told her, "I am only doing this." "Oh, okay, but I just thought you could do this." And I said, "No, I won't be doing that." Like, I don't know how else to explain myself. I won't be doing that, and I don't want to do that. And you know what? The thing is that
That's a complete sentence.
it is. It is. Like, I won't be doing that. And she was like, oh, okay, I understand. Okay, well, I'm glad you do understand. It's happening anyway. You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Right.
I just thought of like, why would I do? I went back to old Laura. I just like to entertain thoughts sometimes. Old Laura would have been like, okay, yeah, I'll do that because I want to keep her friendship, and of course, I'll do that.
Well, yeah, because that's the root of people pleasing behavior,
Yeah.
right? I don't want to be rejected and I want you to like me, and I
Yes.
don't value myself enough to think that you will like me as me. So I
Yes.
have to earn your love, and it goes into conditional love, and love
Right.
has to be earned, and I don't feel worthy
Right.
of you. I don't feel worthy of what I don't feel like what I have to offer is good enough, and I don't feel
Right.
worthy of you. So
Right.
now I feel like I have to be happy all the time, and I can't say
Yeah.
that I have, feelings, and I can't say no
Right.
because I
That you
want you to
have
like
wants and
me
needs. Yeah.
and I value you
Exactly.
and I don't want to lose you. But then all that does is push them away in the long run because that's not honest, and a relationship can't be built on
Well,
dishonesty
it's
and
transactional, and if they are done having transactions with you, then it really wasn't a friendship. It was just a transaction,
well, right.
So
And it just you can't, and I've learned this, you can't make somebody else love themselves. So you can tell someone that
yeah,
they're great and that they're beautiful and I love you and I value you, but if
yeah,
they don't believe it, they're still going to be stuck in that kind of people pleasing behavior,
yeah,
right? And I look at it, I mean, one situation I look at that person and I'm like, no, I loved you.
yeah.
You were enough for me, right? I loved who you are.
Right,
But then it got all disheveled
right.
because you were trying to be somebody else and I never wanted you to be anybody else, and
And
you
it's
didn't
just
have to
touching all the
you
trauma and
you
everything
didn't have to
else.
work for this. Like, I valued you for who you are, but because you didn't value you for who you are,
Yeah,
right, it got projected onto me and it just becomes this whole
right.
thing, right? And it's just,
Well,
I've learned so much, right?
yeah,
And I have so much empathy and compassion now for people because I get it and I understand, but at the same time, people are going to do what people are going to do, and
yes,
they have to help themselves. They have to
right.
fix themselves. They have to heal.
Yeah.
If you don't heal your wounds, you will bleed on people that didn't cut you.
Ugh,
That is such a true statement. I've done
it's
it,
such a
right?
oh
We're all
yes,
a
I
mess.
oh yeah, I've done it.
We're all a mess.
Right. And that's why, let's get help. If
Right.
just I hope you'll take our suggestions and, listen to yourself, and if there's issues that you're having in your life, maybe you're having the same kind of issues over and over, just consider getting into some healthy spaces. And not just necessarily therapy, but there's, holistic therapy and lots of other
Right.
things that you can do. So, well, Kelsey, thank you so much for being here
Thank you for
today.
having me.
You told us a lot of good stuff, I'm telling
I
you.
tried.
You did.
I have been through so much garbage, just like
No more
utter,
garbage for you.
utter nonsense, like years and years of
So now
perpetual nonsense. And
that
I'm
way we
happy.
don't have to do it. That way we don't
Right,
have to do it. Same
right.
thing for
I'm
me,
so happy to be able to share in
So
my
glad.
25 years of existence. These are all the things I've learned. Okay, just for the record, most of
Yeah.
these things I've learned in the last, like, since May.
Okay, great.
Most of this stuff I've learned since May, right? Since my life fell apart and then got put back
Well, but that's
together.
okay.
But
You didn't even get a full brain till then, so you're just being
hey, I
25.
like that.
No, it's
I
true.
like that. It is true. My brain's fully developed now.
It is now. Congratulations. But
Yay.
but
Good
you
for
know what?
me.
And of course, and oh my gosh, we could talk about this forever. But I'm just really proud of you and
Thank
everything
you.
you're doing. And thank you for all the great information. Thank you for sharing your story with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you for
Um,
allowing me to.
of course. And it's a safe place here. What happens out there in podcast land, we don't know, but it's a safe place here. Well, it's okay. So, guys, if this story resonated with you, or if you have a comment and when you listen, will you please go to our social media and comment on Kelsey's picture? There will be a picture of Kelsey. There'll be lots of social media for Kelsey when her episode comes out. And, I just love it if you would comment on there and let us know if it resonated with you. And so, Kelsey, thanks so much. And maybe we'll hear from Kelsey in the future. You never know. There might be more stories to tell. Good stories, not bad
Yeah, I
stories.
was gonna say, hopefully no more
Good.
of this mess, but
No,
I
it's okay.
appreciate it. And I
Of
always
course.
like when I do stuff like this, I always like to put it out there, like,
Yes.
you'll have my social media and stuff will be
Yes.
posted. So if anybody ever wants to reach out to me,
Okay.
if anybody ever, wants to talk or needs support, like I'll do the
Yes.
best I can. But I always like to give people the option if it does
Okay.
resonate with them,
Yes.
shoot me a message, right? Like,
Yeah, we'll have all the
um,
information in the show notes.
absolutely.
A way to get a hold of Kelsey. We'll provide resources as well for some of the things we talked about, celebrate recovery. We talked about suicide and stuff. So I'll throw in a bunch of, there's resources everywhere. I try to provide resources with each episode because there's usually something, we're talking about deep stuff. And people may not know where to get help, but we will definitely do that. And if you want to reach out to Kelsey, her information's in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for being here, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks again.
Right. Bye.